Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And this one, I gotta say, it's pretty creepy. We're diving into the Highway 8 killer case. Have you heard of this one? It's got all the elements you could ask for. Unsolved disappearances, rural Canada whispers of a killer who kind of just vanished.
Yeah, this case is fascinating. You know what really gets me about it is how tough it must have been to investigate crimes out in the middle of nowhere. It's a whole different ballgame from crimes in the city.
Totally.
Yeah.
So describe Highway 8 for us. What exactly are we talking about here?
Okay, so picture this. You're driving down this 2-lane highway through miles and miles of thick forest in Ontario, Canada. Every once in a while, you might pass a farmhouse, but that's about it. Just you, the road, and the trees. Now try to imagine finding evidence or tracking a suspect or even figuring out where a crime happened in all that vast empty space.
It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is like a giant wilderness.
Exactly.
That's a chilling thought. And this is where our story begins, right? Back in the late 90s, when people started vanishing along this isolated road.
Yeah. The first victim that really got everyone's attention was Sarah. She was in her 20s and she went missing in 1997. Driving home late one night, and her car was found abandoned on Highway 8.
You know, you hear about cases where the car's a mess inside, signs of a struggle, but not here, right?
Nope, not at all. Her car was found unlocked, purse was still inside, no signs of a fight at all. It's like she just stepped out of her car and disappeared.
That's scary. Did they ever find out what happened to her?
They did. They found her body weeks later, miles away from her car. But here's the thing. There were no obvious signs of violence. Nothing like bullet wounds or stab wounds. No clear indication of how she died. Some reports even suggested she might have been poisoned, but nothing was confirmed.
So the killer made her death look almost natural. It's terrifying.
Exactly. It points to a level of planning and skill that's just mind-boggling. And this wasn't a one-time thing either. Less than a year later, a young man named Mike disappeared under almost the same circumstances again along Highway 8.
Really? So the same MO. Abandoned car belongings, untouched body, found miles away. Did the police start to think there was a connection at this point?
Well, you'd think so, right? But people were reluctant to accept the idea of a serial killer operating in this quiet, rural community. They wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, a series of unfortunate events.
Yeah, I get that. People want to hold on to hope that their community isn't being terrorized, but denying the possibility can be dangerous.
Exactly. And as more people started vanishing along Highway 8 over the next few years, that denial began to fade.
It seems like each case followed a similar pattern. Abandoned cars with no signs of struggle. Bodies discovered weeks later in remote locations.
Yeah, and each new victim just deepened the mystery surrounding the Highway 8 killer. It became clear that this was someone who wasn't just capable of violence, but also incredibly careful about covering their tracks.
So we're talking about a potential serial killer who's methodical, organized, maybe even really good at what they do. What kind of profile were investigators working with?
Well, one of the things that really struck them was the complete lack of physical evidence at the crime scenes. No DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints or tire tracks, nothing that could link any of the victims to a suspect.
Hold on, no DNA. In the late 90s, that's unusual. Was this someone with special knowledge? Someone who knew how to avoid leaving a trace?
That's exactly what investigators started to suspect. The idea that the killer might have had some kind of background in law enforcement or forensics, using their knowledge to cover their tracks.
Wait, are we saying the person responsible for these disappearances could have been someone who was supposed to uphold the law? That's bone-chilling.
Yeah, it is. Imagine the control it would take to not only commit these crimes, but to completely erase your presence from the scene like that.
Make you want to double-check your locks at night. Okay, so if they suspected this level of expertise, where did they even begin to look for a suspect?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated. The investigation took them in two very different directions, each with its own set of challenges.
Oh, this is where it gets interesting. Give us the rundown. What were the two main theories that emerged?
One theory focused on the idea that the killer might be a long-haul truck driver. Someone familiar with the route's back roads, all those long stretches of isolated highway crisscrossing the region. They could easily pick up a victim along Highway 8, disappear for hours, and be miles away before anyone knew something was wrong.
Makes sense. A truck driver would be able to cover a lot of ground and wouldn't stand out in the regular traffic. But what was the other theory?
The other theory hit closer to home for people in those rural communities. They thought the killer might actually be a local, someone living in the area familiar with the back roads and the routines of the victims.
That's a creepy thought. To think the killer could be someone you see every day at the store or the gas station.
Yeah.
Someone who's part of the community.
Yeah. The idea that the killer could be hiding in plain sight, living a double life, really added to the fear and uncertainty surrounding the case.
So you have these two very different profiles. A transient outsider versus someone deeply embedded in the community. How did investigators approach each possibility?
Each theory came with its own obstacles. The truck driver theory meant dealing with the huge trucking industry. Trying to find a specific driver without solid leads or evidence was like finding a needle in a haystack. And with the local theory, the challenge was sifting through potentially hundreds or even thousands of suspects within the community itself.
Sounds like they were fighting an uphill battle, trying to track down this ghost of a killer who vanished after each crime.
Yeah, and just when the investigators felt like they were hitting dead end after dead end, the case took another turn. After 8 or 9 victims, the pattern just stopped. And it's like the killer just disappeared.
Wait, they just stopped? No more disappearances, no more bodies found.
That's right. It was like the Highway 8 killer just ceased to exist. And of course, that just raised more questions.
My mind's racing with possibilities. Did they move to a new location? Did they get caught for something else? Did they die? Or are they still out there waiting to strike again?
Those are the questions that have haunted investigators and the public for years. The sudden stop to the killings just made the mystery deeper, leaving everyone with an uneasy feeling.
It's like a story that ends mid-sentence, leaving you hanging and wanting to know what happens next.
Right. And just when you think the story is over, there's a twist. New cases popped up in the 2010s, not directly connected to Highway 8, but with the same creepy characteristics. Abandoned cars, bodies found far away, lack of evidence.
It's almost like a ghost story. The Highway 8 killer coming back to haunt a new generation.
Exactly. And these new cases got everyone talking and speculating. Was it the same killer returning after a break?
Or was it a copycat? Someone inspired by the legend of the Highway 8 killer trying to disappear without a trace just like them.
Those are the questions that investigators and true crime fans have been trying to answer ever since.
Well, one thing's for sure. We've only scratched the surface of this mystery. There's a lot more to uncover, and I can't wait to find out what happens next.
Don't worry, there's plenty more to come. We're going to dive into the psychology, the investigative challenges, and the impact the Highway 8 killer case had on society as a whole. Just a moment.
It's hard not to think about the victims and their families in a case like this. They're the ones left with the pain and the questions that might never be answered.
Absolutely. We can get caught up in the mystery, the puzzle of who the killer is and why they did it, but we have to remember real people lost their lives, and families were torn apart by these tragedies.
It's like that saying about a ripple effect.
Exactly. And for those left behind, the ripple effect can be a constant pain, a feeling of emptiness, and unresolved grief.
It must be so frustrating, not knowing why their loved one was targeted, not having any closure because the person responsible was never caught.
And in cases like this, where the killer is still out there, that lack of closure comes with the constant fear, knowing that the person who did these horrible things could still be out there living among them, maybe even walking the same streets.
That thought would keep me up at night. To think that the killer could be someone you pass by every day, someone you might even know.
It really shakes your sense of security, especially in places like these small towns where people usually trust and know each other well.
It makes you question everything and everyone, doesn't it? Who can you really trust? Who might be hiding something terrible?
And that's one of the lasting impacts of cases like the Highway 8 killer. The erosion of trust that lingers in a community long after the news stories fade away.
It's like a scar on the landscape, a reminder of the darkness that was there. And I imagine that feeling of vulnerability and fear is even worse because the victims seem to have been chosen randomly.
You're right. That randomness makes it harder to cope with. It's not like those crimes of passion where there's a clear link between the killer and the victim. This feels more planned, more predatory.
Like a hunter stalking prey.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the two main theories about the killer's identity: the truck driver versus the local. If we're thinking about someone who blends in, who doesn't stand out, the truck driver theory seems fit. But how do you explain the lack of evidence, the meticulousness, if it's just some random truck driver passing through?
Right.
Some experts say that a killer just passing through wouldn't have the time or the chance to plan these crimes so carefully.
So that makes the local theory more likely. Someone who knows the area, knows the victim's routines, and can disappear easily after each crime.
Yeah, it seems that way. But the local theory has problems too. For one, it assumes that someone in these close-knit communities could be so violent and no one would notice.
It's like we're looking at two sides of the same coin. Both make sense. but neither fully explains the Highway 8 killer puzzle.
And then there's the added mystery of the killing suddenly stopping. Why would a killer who seemed to have everything under control, who was so good at not getting caught, just stop?
It's like they vanished just like their victims. Is it possible the police were getting close, that the killer felt the pressure and decided to lay low?
It's possible. Maybe they sensed the investigation was getting closer and decided to change their approach to disappear for a while?
Or maybe something big happened in their life, something that changed their situation or their reasons for killing. Maybe a new job, a move, or a health problem. We just don't know.
That's the frustrating part. There's this big gap in the story, a missing piece that we might never find.
And then there are those copycat killings, or the possibility of them making things even more confusing and scary.
It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but some pieces are missing and others seem to belong to a different puzzle altogether.
I understand why this case has captivated people for so many years. It's a mystery within a mystery.
And it's a mystery that makes us question what we know about human nature, the reasons behind violence, and the power of the unknown.
It's a stark reminder that even in the quietest parts of the world, darkness can exist, and sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are the ones that stay unsolved.
You know, we've talked a lot about the theories surrounding the Highway 8 killer and how hard it is to investigate a case with so little physical evidence.
And you know, one of the biggest challenges in any serial killer investigation is building a psychological profile of the offender.
It's like you're putting together a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing and you don't even have the box to look at.
You've got these bits of behavior, these glimpses into their mind, but trying to put together a complete picture of their motives, a clear understanding of what makes them tick, it's really tough.
Especially in a case like this where the victims seem to be chosen at random. It's not like they're going after a specific type of person or following a particular pattern. It's almost like anyone could be a victim.
That's what makes this case so scary.
Yeah.
There's this feeling that no one is safe because there's no way to know who might be next.
Like a deadly game of chance.
Yeah.
And that uncertainty must be really hard on a community. Oh, absolutely. It can lead to suspicion, distrust, even paranoia. People start looking at their neighbors differently, wondering if someone they've known for years could be hiding a dark secret.
Like a poison spreading through the community, breaking down the trust and connections that hold people together.
And that's one of the consequences of these kinds of crimes that we don't talk about enough, the psychological and social scars that stick around long after the initial shock is gone.
We tend to focus on the victims, and rightfully so. But it's important to remember that the impact of these crimes goes way beyond the families. It affects the whole community, creating this sense of vulnerability and fear that can be really hard to shake.
And in cases like this where they never catch the killer, that vulnerability just gets worse. There's no closure, no resolution, just this constant fear that the person who did it is still out there living among them, waiting to do it again.
It's like a ghost story.
Yeah.
The ghost of the Highway 8 killer hanging over the community. This constant reminder that the darkness is still there just below the surface.
And that makes you think about why we're so drawn to these unsolved mysteries. What is it about cases like the Highway 8 killer that keeps us coming back even decades later?
I think it's that basic human need to understand the world. We crave order. We want to believe there's a reason for everything. And when we're faced with something as senseless and brutal as these killings, it challenges our whole idea of safety and predictability.
And maybe it's also the puzzle itself, the intellectual challenge of trying to untangle a complex mystery to connect the dots and find the missing pieces.
Like a giant game of Clue, but with real consequences.
Yeah.
And I think a part of us wants to believe we can solve the puzzle, that we can bring the killer to justice, even if it's just in our minds.
You know, maybe someone listening right now will hear something, remember something, or make a connection that could help crack the case wide open.
You never know. And until that day comes, we'll keep exploring these mysteries, keep digging into the darkness, and keep searching for those answers that seem just out of reach.
It reminds us that the search for knowledge, the search for truth, never really ends. And sometimes the most important things we discover are the ones that force us to face the harsh realities of the world.
You've definitely given us a lot to think about today. The Highway 8 killer case is a scary reminder that even in the most peaceful and seemingly safe places, darkness can exist, and sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are the ones that remain unsolved. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember the truth is out there somewhere.